Good afternoon, good evening. Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, Ambassadors, Delegates, Director General, in my capacity as outgoing President of the 72nd World Health Assembly, I am pleased to welcome you all to this virtual platform. Now let us turn to the high-level welcome. I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Madame Michelle Bocos, Director General Envoy of Multilateral Affairs, to facilitate this session. Madame Bocos, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, President. Your Excellencies, the World Health Assembly is the biggest event on the global health agenda. Each year, thousands of people, including health ministers and high-profile personalities, converge in Geneva to discuss issues of global importance, ranging from health security to universal health coverage. This year, we are meeting in a virtual platform. Nevertheless, the spirit of togetherness that characterizes the Assembly is still with us. Au nom du Directeur Général, le Dr.
In the name of the Director General, Dr. Tedros, it is my honor to welcome world leaders who have been kind enough to agree to participate in this historic de minimis assembly with us. I shall invite the first of our 8 high-level guests to make her statement as the representative of the host country. Your Excellency Simonetta Miriam Sommaruga, President of the Swiss Confederation, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President, Director General, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, Your Excellencies, delegates. The crisis that all the member states of the World Health Organization are currently going through is a major challenge for all of us. Switzerland would like to thank WHO for its commitment, its untiring commitment to tackle the pandemic. Switzerland would also like to express her warmest gratitude towards healthcare workers. They have shown unswerving dedication and courage in every corner of the world. Director General, in these very special, particular circumstances, let me assure you of the full and total support of Switzerland to the World Health Organization. Our commitment to you is based on support for multilateralism, solidarity, and international cooperation. Today, more than ever, these things are absolutely essential, and they need to be strengthened. What they do not need is to be undermined. That's why Switzerland is working to set up a coalition of countries, each of which will represent a region of the world. The purpose of this is to guarantee global universal health security with the WHO at the core of that. We need to overcome what divides and separates us in order to protect our people better. If we are to do that, we need to carry out a thorough analysis of the measures taken in and by different countries in order to strengthen the international health regulations and what we will do in the future. In the past, WHO has been able to learn lessons from the epidemics which the organization has had to deal with. I am convinced that the organization will also be able to carry out a thorough and critical review of the current crisis in order to improve its future health emergency management. For the moment, however, we must focus on managing this current crisis. WHO needs to learn from the experiences which individual countries have had, but at the same time, she must act autonomously and in a very proactive way in order to cope with health emergencies. At the same time, it's equally important to ensure that the organization has financial room for maneuver. Yet, at the moment, the organization is being funded to the tune of almost 80% of its contributions by voluntary contributions. I think we have to ask the question, is it reasonable and is it right to demand so much from the organization and yet contribute to it in such a hit-and-miss manner? This current crisis has shown how crucial it is to have a strong, effective and universal organization which can be committed over the long term. If it is to be committed over the long term, however, it must have sustainable financing, which will enable it to independently guarantee and provide its expertise now and in the future. Director General, as we go through this crisis, be assured that you have Switzerland's full support and cooperation. All of us as member states of the World Health Organization need to be focusing on saving lives, protecting the health of our people, and providing health care to those who are sick. We can do that, but we will do it only if we act together, pooling our strength in an international framework that provided by the World Health Organization. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, has been good enough to be with us today as well. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you for this opportunity to address you on the greatest challenge of our age. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated our global fragility. Despite the enormous scientific and technological advances of recent decades, a microscopic virus has brought us to our knees. We do not yet know how to eradicate, treat, or vaccinate against COVID-19. And we have no clear idea when we will be able to do these things. But the fragility exposed by the virus is not limited to our health systems. It affects all areas of our world and our institutions. The fragility of coordinated global efforts is highlighted by our failed response to the climate crisis. The fragility of our nuclear disarmament regime is shown by the ever-increasing risk of proliferation. The fragility of our web protocols is laid bare by constant breaches in cybersecurity, as cyber warfare is also already happening in a lawless international environment. COVID-19 must be a wake-up call. It is time for an end of this hubris. Our deep feelings of powerlessness must lead to greater humility. Deadly global threats require a new unity and solidarity. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs,
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we've heard a lot of expressions about solidarity, but we haven't seen very much unity in our response to COVID-19. Countries have implemented different strategies, sometimes contradictory strategies, and all of us are now paying the price for that. Many countries ignored the recommendations of the World Health Organization. Consequently, the virus has spread across the world and it's now heading for developing countries, and there its effects will be even more devastating than in the developed nations. We see an increasing risk of new peaks, new waves of infection. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the United Nations and I have been pleading for a three-stage response. First of all, a complete, full, coordinated, large-scale health response led by the WHO, emphasizing solidarity with developing countries. We need to unite our efforts to assist the most vulnerable countries and strengthen and develop further their health systems. We also have to accompany that with humanitarian measures. There is an increasingly urgent need to invest in the expansion of mental health services as well, so as to tackle the devastating psychological impact of the crisis. We have people who are grieving, who are anxious, who are depressed, who are afraid of the future, and they must be helped. We also need measures to tackle the economic and social effects of the crisis. And here, let me be crystal clear. This is not a choice between responding to the health consequences of the pandemic or responding to its economic and social consequences. We can't divide things like that. If we do not control the spread of the virus, the economy will never recover. So as we're taking health measures, we also need to take direct measures to support households and businesses and help them stay afloat. We need to focus on the most vulnerable: women, children, elderly people, the low-paid, and other vulnerable groups. That's why I have urged the G20 to look with urgency at a recovery plan which will be large scale and which will cover at least 10% of the world's GDP. Developed countries may be able to manage this themselves, but we must give a massive increase in the resources available to support developing countries. I've also urged a strengthening of the support provided through the World Bank Group, the IMF, and other international financial institutions. Thirdly, post-COVID-19 recovery must create fairer, more inclusive, and more egalitarian economies and stronger and more resilient societies. Yes, this pandemic is an absolute tragedy, but our response to it and our reconstruction afterwards needs to put human rights at the center of whatever we do. At the same time, we must take this opportunity to tackle the climate crisis, which is still there, and to fight against inequalities as well as to plug the yawning gaps in our social protection systems. We have an opportunity to rebuild, but to rebuild something better than we had before. By focusing on the most vulnerable, we want to make sure that we have greater inclusivity, more clean energy, stronger social security systems, and all that through expanded and preferably universal health coverage. All that requires a major multilateral effort. I hope that the finding of a vaccine against this coronavirus will be a starting point, but it can only be that. We have a historic opportunity here to step up research and to reduce the inequalities in access to medical treatment and medical care. It is essential that everybody in this world, wherever he or she may be, is able to have access to medical care, and particularly if and when we get a vaccine, to that which will be a global public good. We can do that. We must do that.
Tribute to the frontline health workers who are the heroes of this pandemic. From nurses, doctors and midwives to technicians and administrators, millions of healthcare workers are putting themselves in harm's way every day to protect us. We owe them our deepest appreciation and solidarity. The entire United Nations family stands with the thousands of our colleagues of the World Health Organization who are working around the world to support member states in saving lives and protecting the vulnerable with guidance, training, and essential testing, treatment, and protective equipment. We thank you for your service. I saw the courage and determination of WHO personnel working to end the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo when I visited last year. It is partly or largely thanks to their efforts in very difficult and dangerous conditions that new infections have been contained, and we are counting down to the end of the Ebola outbreak. The WHO is irreplaceable. It needs enhanced resources, particularly to provide support to developing countries, which must be our greatest concern. We are as strong as the weakest health systems. Protecting the developing world is not a matter of charity or generosity, but a question of enlightened self-interest. The global north cannot defeat COVID-19 unless the global south defeats it at the same time. As I said last month, and I quote, "Once we have finally turned the page on this epidemic, there must be a time to look back fully to understand how such a disease emerged and spread its devastation so quickly across the globe, and how all those involved reacted to the crisis. The lessons learned will be essential to effectively address similar challenges as they may arise in the future. But now is not that time. Now it's a time for unity, for the international community to work together in solidarity to stop this virus and its shattering consequences." End of quote. We cannot contemplate a future of fear and insecurity. Either we get through this pandemic together or we fail. Either we stand together or we fall apart. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I shall now invite the President of South Africa and current Chairperson of the African Union, His Excellency President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, to make his statement. South Africa, can you please join us? I think we are waiting for the connection with South Africa. Just a few more seconds, and we should have South Africa online now. While we are waiting for the connection with South Africa, we'll just show a short video again. It seems we still have a problem of connection with South Africa, so we are re-establishing the connection with South Africa. In the meantime, I welcome to speak next His Excellency President Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China. Excellency, you have the floor.
President of the World Health Assembly, Director General of the World Health Organization, dear delegates. To begin with, I wish to say that it is of significant importance for this World Health Assembly to be held at such a critical moment as the human race battles this novel coronavirus. While we are facing is the most serious global public health emergency since the end of the Second World War. Catching the world by surprise, COVID-19 has hit over 210 countries and regions, affected more than 7 billion people around the world, and claimed over 300,000 precious lives. I mourn for every life lost and express condolence to the bereaved families. The history of human civilization is one of fighting diseases and tiding over disasters. The virus does not respect borders, nor is race or nationality relevant in the face of the disease. Confronted by the ravages of COVID-19, the international community has not flinched. The people of all countries have tackled the virus head-on. Around the world, people have looked out for each other and pulled together as one. With love and compassion, we have forged extraordinary synergy in the fight against COVID-19. In China, after making painstaking efforts and enormous sacrifice, we have turned the tide on the virus and protected the life and health of our people. All along, we have acted with openness, transparency, and responsibility. We have provided information to the WHO and relevant countries in the most timely fashion. We have released the genome sequence at the earliest possible time. We have shared control and treatment experience with the world without reservation. We have done everything in our power to support and assist countries in need. Mr. President, even as we meet, the virus is still raging, and more must be done to bring it under control. To this end, I want to make the following proposals. First, we must do everything we can for COVID-19 control and treatment. This is the most urgent task. We must always put the people first, for nothing in the world is more precious than people's lives. We need to deploy medical expertise and critical supplies to places where they are needed the most. We need to take a strong step in such key areas as prevention, quarantine, detection, treatment, and tracing. We need to move as fast as we can to curb the global spread of the virus and do our best to stem cross-border transmission. We need to step up information sharing, exchange experience and best practice, and pursue international cooperation on testing methods, clinical treatment, and vaccine and medicine research and development. We also need to continue supporting global research by scientists on the source and the transmission routes of the virus. Second, the World Health Organization should lead the global response. Under the leadership of Dr. Tedros, WHO has made a major contribution in leading and advancing the global response to COVID-19. Its good work is applauded by the international community. At this critical juncture, to support WHO is to support international cooperation and the battle for saving lives as well. China calls on the international community to increase political and financial support for WHO so as to mobilize resources worldwide to defeat the virus. Third, we must provide greater support for Africa. Developing countries, African countries in particular, have weaker public health systems. Helping them build capacity must be our top priority in COVID-19 response. The world needs to provide more material, technological, and personal support for African countries. China has sent a tremendous amount of medical supplies and assistance to over 50 African countries and the African Union. 5 Chinese medical expert teams have also been sent to the African continent. In total, in the past 7 decades, over 200 million people in Africa have received care and treatment from Chinese medical teams. At present, 46 resident Chinese medical teams are in Africa, helping with COVID-19 containment efforts locally. Fourth, we must strengthen global governance in the area of public health. We human beings will eventually prevail over the coronavirus. Yet, this may not be the last time a major health emergency comes knocking at our door. In view of the weakness and deficiencies exposed by COVID-19, we need to improve the governance system for public health security. We need to respond more quickly to public health emergencies and establish global and regional reserve centers of anti-epidemic supplies. China supports the idea of a comprehensive review of the global response to COVID-19 after it is brought under control, to sum up experience and address deficiencies. This work should be based on science and professionalism, led by the WHO and conducted in an objective and impartial manner. Fifth, we must restore economic and social development. While working on an ongoing basis to contain the virus, countries where conditions permit may reopen businesses and schools in an orderly fashion in observance of WHO's professional recommendations. In the meantime, international macroeconomic policy coordination should be stepped up, and the global industrial and supply chains be kept stable and unclogged if we are to restore growth to the economy of the world. Sixth, we must strengthen international cooperation. Mankind is a community with a shared future. Solidarity and cooperation is our most powerful weapon for defeating the virus. This is the key lessons the world has learned from fighting HIV/AIDS, Ebola, avian influenza, H1N1, and other major epidemics. And solidarity and cooperation is a sure way through which we, the people of the world, can defeat this novel coronavirus. Mr. President, China stands for the vision of building a community with a shared future for mankind. China takes it as its responsibility to ensure not just the life and health of its own citizens, but also global public health. For the sake of boosting international cooperation against COVID-19, I would like to announce the following. China will provide $2 billion over 2 years to help with COVID-19 response, and with economic and social development in affected countries, especially developing countries. China will work with the UN to set up a global humanitarian response depot and hub in China, ensure the operation of anti-epidemic supply chains, and foster green corridors for fast-track transportation and customs clearance. China will establish a cooperation mechanism for its hospitals to pair up with 30 African hospitals and accelerate the building of the Africa CDC headquarters to help the continent ramp up its disease preparedness and control capacity. COVID-19 vaccine development and deployment in China, when available, will be made a global public good. This will be China's contribution to ensuring vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing countries. China will work with other G20 members to implement the debt service suspension initiative for the poorest countries. China is also ready to work with the international community to bolster support for the hardest hit countries under the greatest strain of debt service so that they could tide over the current difficulties. To conclude, I call on all of us to come together and work as one. Let's make concerted efforts to protect the health and life of people in all countries. Let's work together to safeguard planet Earth, our common home. Let's work together to build a global community of health for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. J'ai le plaisir à présent de donner la parole au président de la France.
Thank you. It's my pleasure now to give the floor to the President of France, His Excellency Mr. Emmanuel Macron. Sir, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée.
Thank you. President of the World Health Assembly, United Nations Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Director General of the World Health Organization. To begin with, may I thank you for having invited me to participate at this opening of the 73rd World Health Assembly. There is no doubt that this is one of the most important assemblies in the history of the World Health Organization. It must be a moment for unity and a moment for solidarity, but also a moment for clear thought and action in the face of what is an unprecedented global crisis affecting all of us. It should also be a moment for remembering the intentions of the WHO's founding fathers in 1948. They wanted to build a new world where everybody could enjoy the best possible standard of health, and that's a fundamental right for every human being. We should also remember the progress that we've made together with WHO towards achieving that goal. We've achieved increased life expectancy, reduced child mortality, we've eradicated fatal diseases such as smallpox, and then there are the battles which we're still waging against tuberculosis, malaria and HIV, to increase access to medical treatment, to spread vaccination and to strengthen health systems. The COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, turned our lives and our societies upside down. It's brought our economies to a halt, and it's exposed the vulnerability of all of us. In addition, it's reminded us, if we needed such a reminder, of how valuable human health is and how valuable those who work to protect it are. In this year of nurses and midwives, I should like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all of those who are working on the front line to protect and take care of others. Sometimes they're doing so at risk of their own lives, and the appalling attack against a maternity hospital in Afghanistan a few days ago has shown how tragically true that is. At a moment when health workers are fighting against the pandemic, when all our people and all our countries are facing it with courage, we cannot let ourselves be divided. We have no right to shirk our responsibilities. We do, however, have a collective duty to be effective. Our absolute priority, the only priority worth talking about, is to conquer this pandemic, and each of us can contribute to bringing that about. States, international organizations, specialized funds, grassroots organizations and non-governmental organizations, the pharmaceutical industry, development banks and ordinary citizens. Only if we join forces together will we beat this pandemic, and we need WHO for her irreplaceable coordinating role, for her scientific expertise, for her knowledge of the situation on the ground. We need a strong WHO to tackle COVID-19, and the WHO is us, its member states. Therefore, if the organization is to play its role in full in coordinating an international response to pandemics, this and others, it needs all of us. That's precisely why recently France has decided to substantially increase our financial contribution to this organization. With WHO, with our European partners, and with everybody involved in global health, we have launched an initiative called Act A. The purpose of that is to offer massive support to research, to speed up the results of medical research, and to ensure that we can guarantee universal access to the tools we need to fight the pandemic. If we do discover a vaccine against COVID-19, it will be a global public good and everyone must have access to it. This is a question of effectiveness, really. As long as the disease remains a threat to a few, it will remain a threat for everybody. It's also, however, a question of principle. Human health cannot be quarrelled over, cannot be appropriated, and cannot be bought and sold. Therefore, Europe makes an unrestricted commitment to building and improving the international response to the pandemic. On the 4th of May last, a financing conference was organized by the European Commission, and that made it possible to mobilize 7.5 billion euros to achieve the goals of Act A. With her international partners then, Europe intends to make a solid response to strengthen the implementation of the international health regulations, to improve warning systems and emergency response, and to strengthen research so that we can, together and in a spirit of cooperation and transparency, better understand the crisis we are facing and learn the lessons as to how we can best respond to it. We need to look the situation clearly and head-on and carry out an honest and vigorous assessment of what's worked and what hasn't worked in the way this international crisis has been managed. Here we have an opportunity to provide a single, united response to the pandemic, free of complacency and unfounded accusations. We need to be united, demanding, and clear-headed. That is our duty. I therefore urge all the members of this Assembly to show both responsibility and action. And I do this in the name of what led to the creation of this organization and in the name of a fundamental right of all mankind, the right to hope. Thank you. Thank you very much, President.
To now invite the President of the Republic of Korea, His Excellency President Moon Jae-in. You have the floor, Excellency.
존경하는 의장님, 사무총장님, 각국 대표단 여러분, 코로나를 극복하고 새로
Delegates from various nations, I find it greatly meaningful to speak before the World Health Assembly, a gathering convened to overcome COVID-19 and usher in new hope. First of all, I would like to offer my deepest condolences and words of comfort to the victims of COVID-19 all over the world. Moreover, my utmost respect and gratitude go to the medical and quarantine professionals in each country, putting themselves at risk to protect the health and safety of humanity. Today, I would like to introduce to you the choice made by the Korean people to overcome COVID-19, the choice of a freedom for all. The Republic of Korea was one of the first countries hit by COVID-19, and we had to swiftly identify a solution against the aggressive virus. In that moment of crisis and challenge, the Korean people made a bold decision. We took our own individual freedoms and turned it to an even greater freedom, freedom for all. Rather than regarding our neighbors as dangerous spreaders of the virus or enforcing nationwide lockdown measures, we chose to protect their safety for the sake of our own safety. In order to uphold free movement and keep the economy going, the Korean people chose to wear masks and participate actively in social distancing. Even in the face of this social distancing, however, we grew closer and our hearts fonder. Healthcare workers gave their all through volunteer service, while citizens encouraged them through various acts of sharing. In the recent nationwide general elections, despite the rigorous quarantine procedures in place, over 29 million Korean voters went to the ballots. As a result, we had a true celebration of democracy, all without a single new infection, with an even higher voter turnout than usual. This idea of protecting our neighbors developed further to include the neighbors beyond our borders. We kept our borders open and maintained our ties of exchange, while also providing diagnostic kits, face masks, and other supplies as much as we could. The Korean people displayed the highest form of civic virtues to practice the spirit of freedom for all and voluntarily participated in quarantine efforts. This was what really enabled the three main principles of openness, transparency, and democracy to flourish. The government also supported the people's efforts with swift, widespread testing and creative approaches. The Republic of Korea, however, has not yet achieved complete victory over this virus. We have transitioned from social distancing to routine distancing and are working to balance our daily lives with ongoing quarantine efforts, and yet we are still seeing instances of sporadic cluster infections. Moreover, the ongoing global pandemic still poses grave threats. If we do not come up with a viable treatment option or a vaccine, a new wave of infections could break out once again. However, one thing is absolutely clear. Sharing information and cooperating with one another demonstrate a power that no virus will ever have, a power that only humans possess. COVID-19 is threatening our freedoms, a universal virtue of all humankind, but it is solidarity and cooperation based on such freedoms that will prove to be the strongest weapon we have to triumph over COVID-19. Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, based on the spirit of a greater freedom for all, I would like to make 3 proposals for overcoming the current crisis and preparing for its aftermath. First, we must expand our humanitarian assistance for countries with vulnerable healthcare systems and share our quarantine experiences. Until the day everyone is free from COVID-19, we must work together and leave no one behind. This year, the Republic of Korea is planning to provide humanitarian assistance worth $100 million. Our response to the crisis, our immigration policies, and other such experiences and data we have accumulated during this outbreak will be continuously shared with the international community. To safeguard the health of all humanity, we will continue to work closely with the WHO. Second, in order to develop vaccines and treatments, we must cooperate beyond our borders. Furthermore, such vaccines and treatments are public goods that must be distributed equitably to the whole world. The Republic of Korea fully supports the efforts of the WHO to develop vaccines and treatments. The Republic of Korea is also working with Gavi, the Global Fund, UNITAID, and the International Vaccine Institute as a donor country. And this year, we will begin contributing to CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Third, we must update the WHO international health regulations and other relevant norms and augment them with binding legal force. A novel infectious disease could emerge at any time, and we must be able to respond more quickly and effectively. Infection-related data should be shared among countries in a more transparent manner, and an early warning system and a cooperation mechanism must be jointly established. At the G20 and ASEAN +3 summits, various measures for cooperation were proposed, and I hope they will be made more concrete. Honorable Chair, Director General, delegates from various nations. In the face of crisis, humankind must choose solidarity and cooperation over the pursuit of individual interests. The world must unite under the banner of mutual trust and inclusiveness in the face of deepening crisis. If the international community firmly commits to the greater cause of freedom for all, we will undoubtedly overcome the current crisis quickly and bolster our hope for the post-COVID-19 era.
to reconnect with South Africa to listen to President Ramaphosa's speech. If you are online, can you please click on the video? I think we still have connection problems, so I will ask our next guest. Our next guest speaker is no stranger to the Health Assembly. Please join me to welcome the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Angela Merkel. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Sehr geehrter Herr Generaldirektor Tedros, Exzellenzen, sehr geehrter
Director General Dr. Tedros, ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a global crisis with hundreds of thousands of people who have been infected and affected with social and economic consequences that show that virtually no country has been spared by this pandemic. So no country can solve this problem alone. We must work together. So I'd like to thank you all for participating in this World Health Assembly to try and find a solution together. What could help us is that the 2014 Ebola epidemic helped us to strengthen systems within the WHO. The G7 and G20 have also chosen healthcare as a priority topic, and at the last year's World Health Assembly, we adopted to work for health and well-being. COVID-19 shows that we need to do more, in particular in the area of prevention and in working on research and strengthening health systems. The WHO is the legitimate world organization for the area of health, and so we should continue to work to improve procedures within the WHO. And we also need to look at the financing to ensure it is sustainable. And we must, first of all, combat this pandemic. And we need to put into place a solution that everyone can stand behind. And we need to face together the social and economic costs and consequences of the pandemic. I am convinced that we will be able to overcome this pandemic when we work together, and that will help us to achieve this more rapidly. So I'd like to thank all those who contribute to global well-being. Thank you.
I have the pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister of Barbados, Her Excellency Mayor Amo Motley. You have the floor, Excellency.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and distinguished delegates. Today I join with the defenders of democracy across the Caribbean Community region, the wider Americas, and indeed the small island developing states of the world, who recognize the importance of fearless, robust leadership. I speak to you from this region of the Caribbean, CARICOM as we're known, a region that is characterized by developing health systems that suffer from the same vulnerabilities as many of our countries. Low numbers of ICU beds per capita, few intensivist doctors and critical care nurses, few ventilators per capita. And regrettably, our people have a higher rate of NCDs and obesity than we would like. We have watched how COVID has decimated rich and powerful nations with strong curative care systems, killing their people, overrunning their healthcare systems, and halting business. And so early on, CARICOM decided that we cannot fight the illness and that we had to delay the arrival of COVID-19 into the region as far as possible. We mobilized all of our regional agencies, those that dealt with public health, like the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, or the modeling, like the University of the West Indies, or with our disaster preparedness and mitigation, like SEDIMA, or with the tracking and the movement of persons through our borders, like the Joint Regional Communications Center of CARICOM. The Caribbean region's economies ranks among the most travel and tourism dependent economies in the world. And this has exposed our people and our economies in a way that we have not experienced since becoming independent nations more than 50 years ago in some instances. In our own case in Barbados, our Emergency Operations Center in the Ministry of Health has been functioning since mid-January. We organized our health systems to improve access to the health service for COVID-19 patients, while at the same time reducing the risk of exposure for the most vulnerable populations through reduced movement from as early as February of this year. We repurposed an abandoned naval base into a facility for COVID patients. This expanded our access to critical care beds by over 300%. Fortunately, our investment in and our preparedness of our public health officials over the decades has permitted us to do the type of public health surveillance to detect cases, trace and quarantine contacts, isolate and treat the ill. You will forgive me if I use this opportunity to salute the public health pioneers of the Caribbean over the last 7 decades. They have been true heroes to our people. Our CARICOM heads of government adopted a whole of government and a whole of society approach. In addition, we reached to our Caribbean neighbor Cuba and received hundreds of doctors and nurses to help us. I take this opportunity to thank our brothers and sisters in Cuba and the government of the Republic of Cuba in particular for its unswerving assistance during this pandemic. It has been palpable and clear to all of our population. So, our CARICOM family banded together to lock down and ride out this first wave. And it has been a long and treacherous wave. The closing of our borders and the trebling of unemployment and the reduction of our government revenues by half have created grave challenges for many of us. Similarly, the psyche of people in our hemisphere has been disturbed. For the majority of persons under the age of 70 in the Caribbean, many of whom have never had to confront grave challenges, the world appears to be on autopilot. They wonder who is in control and where is the leadership? Where is the global cooperation that they so expected? And for too many of our citizens globally, life has become a game of roulette, betting on numbers and colors and ignoring the science that needs to underpin our actions. Nations rich and poor are seeking inspiration. This is a crisis, therefore, that strikes not only at the heart of our humanity, but also at the organization of our human societies. It is a crisis that calls for global leadership that will allow us to rebuild our humanity, our environment, and the equity so badly needed in our societies and our economies. COVID has brought many of us closer than we have ever been with each other. It has equally cast a brighter light on the inequities in our society, but then it has also allowed the earth to breathe yet again. It is why we have contended that nothing short of coordinated global leadership, not just of governments, but also from people of influence, whether from the religious or faith-based organizations or in other areas of the society, that they ought to be involved. We need a global leadership initiative that is rooted in moral leadership, more so than ever. Moral leadership that recognizes that 75 years after the United Nations was formed, it is not good enough for us to accept that people or countries can fall through the cracks. That in particular, as we reflect on the events of the last 3 months, were it not for the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, or CARPHA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and more recently the WHO, we would believe that we were living in the wild, wild west that we see in movies, where only those who are strong and well endowed should survive. It is the intervening hand of these agencies that I just mentioned that has sought to move us as a region closer to a level playing field. But my friends, there is still much work to be done. Moral leadership that will finally recognize that the use of historic per capita income to determine access to concessional funds or grant funds, or indeed, as I mentioned earlier, to determine fair access to the procurement of goods is unacceptable. As I have said many times, it is the equivalent of taking my blood pressure reading from 2 years ago and using it today to determine my vulnerability to a stroke. A completely useless exercise. Even when our circumstances deteriorate, there has been no review that takes into account the inherent vulnerability to which we are exposed and which prevents us from being able to access critical money or goods. In addition, the use of certain proxy criteria to access technologies, medicines, vaccines, or concessional funds would exclude vulnerable countries such as ours in the Caribbean, some in Latin America, and even in the Pacific. Why? Because we are using criteria that are more relevant to fighting problems that have little or no relevance to our current vulnerabilities and challenges. For example, we are less than 2 weeks away from the beginning of the hurricane season. Tropical Storm Arthur has already formed off of the Bahamas, well in advance of that start. Many of us are already confronting droughts and the presence of sargassum weed as a result of the climate crisis, and it is wreaking havoc in our societies. But none of these challenges are captured by per capita income or by maternal mortality rates. None of them. In addition, where there is global market failure, as is happening now, small middle-income states are at risk of not being seen or heard, or not even accessing critical goods and supplies. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Tedros for reaching out to the Executive Director of the Global Fund last evening to advocate for the countries in the region that have been excluded from procurement through the consortium of critical COVID-19 medical supplies. We need to be included. It is also therefore clear that we need therefore additional criteria to determine equitable access and fair allocation, criteria that better take into account that vulnerability which we have. And if we're asking for the same solution for climate, for external shocks, as we are asking for the pandemic, it is because all three destroy our capacity to produce as nations and the ability of our people to survive. It is against this background, my friends, that equitable access and fair allocation of resources will allow our small states, particularly middle-income ones, dependent on travel, to be able to have access to increased supplies for testing, such that we can reopen our societies safely to intra-regional travel and thereafter to extra-regional travel. But it will also better allow us to ensure that there is a return to safe work by safe people, the least vulnerable people to COVID-19 in our countries. While we can tolerate high unemployment and severe contraction of our economies for 2 to 3 months, the consequences to our societies of prolonged shutdown are as equal as the high incidence of COVID among our population. That is why we need urgently to get access to adequate numbers of the appropriate tests, in particular the rapid tests that are affordable and reliable if we are to allow our economies and societies to reopen safely. Our small states have been suffering from high debt and low growth for decades, and we believe that there should also be more mature and relevant conversations for middle-income, small island developing states across the globe, especially as it relates to our debt obligations in the midst of this pandemic. Many countries will either have an orderly restructuring of debt, or at the very least, a debt moratorium that provides certainty for both the borrower and the lender. Or they will have a disorderly unraveling that will create a crisis both within the respective countries and within the global financial markets. These conversations must admit of greater certainty in the management of our affairs, and I pray that the global community will have the courage to allow us to have them. I say so, conscious that Barbados took a major leap of faith when we restructured our debt in the last 18 months to include natural disaster clauses in our domestic and external debt instruments that provide for greater fiscal space to be created through a moratorium on the payment of principal and a capitalization of the interests should we face a natural disaster event. The certainty that these natural disaster clauses provide is increased fiscal space. Were this provision available in the context of this pandemic, it would bring tremendous relief to those countries and better position many of us to rebuild in a post-COVID-19 environment. Let me at this juncture express my appreciation to Director General Dr. Tedros and the WHO for the recent appointments of Sir Andrew Whitty and Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, a dear friend of the Caribbean, as special envoys for the North and South respectively for the WHO's Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. It is intended that they will ensure that there's a framework for equitable access to tests, therapeutics, and a vaccine, if ever there is one. In addition, our Caribbean countries salute your inclusive leadership and recognize that without your timely interventions, the efforts of PAHO and CARFA would be stymied as we try to meet the needs of our populations. 42 years on, our community still believes that the principles of Alma Ata must mean something, that we should have equitable access to the supplies we need, that we should be able to afford to save the lives of our citizens, and that the solutions should be appropriate to our context. I must add at this point that global moral leadership also means that in aid of supporting human lives, which none of us can replace, that there ought to be a suspension of international sanctions imposed against countries. Whatever differences or difficulties we may have with each other, they can be put on pause while we wrestle to the ground this awful pandemic. For wherever it exists, it affects each and every one of us. My friends, there was life before COVID-19, and I know that there will be life after COVID-19. For this reason, even with the pandemic, we must not drop the ball on those other global health priorities that are critical to our overall development. I refer specifically to the chronic NCDs, the silent killers of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, hypertension. I refer to HIV and AIDS, and to the antimicrobial resistance that we are fighting, and the other health-related diseases that come as a result of the climate crisis. For our populations, these challenges remain real and continue to be a silent but real and present danger. Let us use the cooperation we are trying to build to also help fight these challenges. Why? Because solidarity, unity, and partnership remain enduring principles for us. These are the principles that led our Caribbean countries to embrace the pursuit of democracy in the late 1930s, just as they also were the principles that helped the world rebuild after 3 decades of challenges 75 years ago with the formation of the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions. I pray that we will have the fortitude to fight against these challenges of our times, relying on these same principles of solidarity, unity, and partnership. I wish the leadership and management of the World Health Organization success in its efforts to promote health, to keep the world safe, and to serve the vulnerable people of our world as it is required to do. Your mission 73 years on, after your formation, remains critical. I say to you, as I leave, the world watches on with bated breath. We wish you all of the very best as you deliberate over these 2 days, for so much depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. We come back now to South Africa, and I invite the President of South Africa, current Chairperson of the African Union, His Excellency President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, to make a statement.
Thank you. I would like to welcome this opportunity to address the World Health Assembly. We are in the midst of the most serious public health emergency our world has experienced in over 100 years. Containing the coronavirus pandemic has dwarfed all other issues facing the international community and individual countries. The pandemic has profound social, political, economic and security implications for all of us. It is impacting on human health, the economies of all affected countries, and the livelihoods of millions of people. Although the virus has affected both developed and developing countries, it is the poor who suffer the most. The pandemic has highlighted the dangerous and growing inequality that exists between countries and within them. The healthcare systems of many countries are struggling to cope. Some have been weakened by underfunding and neglect. Others are under pressure because they were designed to serve the select few. The pandemic has devastated the livelihoods of millions of people in many countries. The global recovery depends on our ability to accept the reality that this virus will be with us for some time and that we need to prepare to adapt accordingly. The social distancing, hygiene, and other protocols recommended by the World Health Organization must become part of our everyday lives. Africa affirms its full support for the World Health Organization, which has been key in guiding the international response to the pandemic. The World Health Organization has been instrumental in providing guidance and support to African governments. Africa is extremely vulnerable to the ravages of this virus and needs every possible support and assistance. The African Union has taken very deliberate steps to respond to the scourge. The African Union has made a call for developing countries to be assisted in their efforts to combat the pandemic and to rebuild their economies. This assistance needs to include debt relief. It also needs to include assistance with regard to diagnostic and therapeutic medical supplies. To turn back the frontiers of the pandemic, we must also deepen international collaboration as well as solidarity around issues like research and development and investment. We fully support the initiative by the World Health Organization, together with many other governments, in assisting the developing countries. For its part, South Africa is participating in several research initiatives. We must ensure that there is equitable access to medical equipment, technologies, in all respects. In this final decade towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, we must press ahead with our goal of making universal health care a reality for all the people of the world, and no one must be left behind. The virus has demonstrated the essential value of universal health coverage, and this is where we need full solidarity. Let us continue to be bold and courageous in confronting this pandemic. Let us continue to collaborate and act in solidarity in the interest of the millions of people around the world. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. It is my honor to now give the floor to the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Bokoz. President Somaruga, President Ramaphosa, President Xi, President Macron, President Moon, Chancellor Merkel, Prime Minister Motley, Mr. Secretary General, President of the World Health Assembly, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. I would like to start by thanking all of our distinguished guests for their support today. Thank you for taking the time to address this important assembly. Thank you for your efforts to respond to COVID-19 at home and abroad. And thank you for your strong support for WHO at this critical time. My sisters and brothers, as you know, this year is the International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. This assembly was intended to be a moment of recognition for the incredible contribution that nurses and midwives make every day in every country. The pandemic has robbed us of that opportunity, but it has only served to illustrate why nurses, midwives, and all health workers are so important. Nurses and midwives have been on the front lines of the fight against COVID-19, putting themselves in harm's way. Many have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of humanity. Last month, WHO published the first State of the World's Nursing Report. It shows that the world is facing a shortfall of 6 million nurses to achieve and sustain universal health coverage. But it also provides a roadmap for governments to invest in nursing, to fill that gap and progress towards universal health coverage, health for all. Now, more than ever, the world needs nurses and midwives. Please join me, wherever you are, in standing to show your appreciation for these true health heroes. Thank you. Thank you. We have come together as the nations of the world to confront the defining health crisis of our time. We come in grief for those we have lost. We come with concern for those still fighting for their lives. We come with determination to triumph over this common threat. And we come with hope for the future. The world has confronted several pandemics before. This is the first caused by a coronavirus. This is a dangerous enemy with a dangerous combination of features. This virus is efficient, fast, and fatal. It can operate in the dark, spread silently if we are not paying attention, then suddenly explodes if we are not ready, and moves like a bushfire. We have seen the same pattern repeated in cities and countries the world over. We must treat this virus with the respect and attention it deserves. More than 4.5 million cases of COVID-19 have now been reported to WHO, and more than 300,000 people have lost their lives. But numbers don't even begin to tell the story of this pandemic. Each loss of life leaves a scar for families, communities, and nations. The health impacts of the pandemic extend far beyond sickness and death caused by the virus itself. The disruption to health systems threatens to unwind decades of progress against maternal and child mortality, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, non-communicable diseases, mental health, polio, and many other of the most urgent health threats. And yet, this is so much more than a health crisis. Lives and livelihoods have been lost or upended. Hundreds of millions of people have lost their jobs. Fear and uncertainty abound. The global economy is headed for its sharpest contraction since the Great Depression. The pandemic has brought out the best and worst of humanity: fortitude and fear, solidarity and suspicion, rapport and recrimination. This contagion exposes the fault lines, inequalities, injustices, and contradictions of our modern world. It has highlighted our strengths and our vulnerabilities. Science has been hailed and scorned. Nations have come together as never before, and geopolitical divisions have been thrown into sharp relief. We have seen what's possible with cooperation and what risk without it. The pandemic is a reminder of the intimate and delicate relationship between people and planet. Any efforts to make our world safer are doomed to fail unless they address the critical interface between people and pathogens and the existential threat of climate change that's making our Earth less habitable. For all the economic, military, and technological might of nations, we have been humbled by this very small microbe. If this virus is teaching us anything, it's humility. Time for humility. 6 months ago, it would have been inconceivable to most that the world's biggest cities would fall early quiet, that shops, restaurants, schools, and workplaces would be closed, that global travel would grind to a standstill, that simply shaking hands could be life-threatening. Terms once used only by epidemiologists like reproduction number, physical distancing, and contact tracing have become common parlance. In less than 5 months, the pandemic has encircled the globe. All countries have faced challenges in coming to grips with this virus, rich and poor, large and small. Low-income countries, small island developing states, and those suffering from violence and conflict are trying to confront this threat in the most challenging of circumstances. How do you practice physical distancing when you live in crowded conditions? How do you stay at home when you have to work to feed your family? How do you practice hand hygiene when you lack clean water? Some countries are succeeding in preventing widespread community transmission. Some have issued stay-at-home orders and imposed severe social restrictions to suppress community transmission. Some are still bracing for the worst, and some are now assessing how to ease the restrictions that have exacted such a heavy social and economic toll. WHO fully understands and supports the desire of countries to get back on their feet and back to work. It's precisely because we want the fastest possible global recovery that we urge countries to proceed with caution. Countries that move too fast without putting in place the public health architecture to detect and suppress transmission run a real risk of handicapping their own recovery. Early serology studies are painting a consistent picture. Even in the worst affected regions, the proportion of the population with the telltale antibodies is no more than 20%, and in most places, less than 10%. In other words, the majority of the world's population remains susceptible to this virus. The risk remains high, and we have a long road to travel. Over the past few months, we have learned an enormous amount about how to prevent infections and save lives. But there is no single action that has made the difference. No testing alone, no contact tracing alone, not isolation, quarantine, hand hygiene, or physical distancing alone. The countries that have done well have done it all. This is the comprehensive approach that WHO has called for consistently. There is no silver bullet. There is no simple solution. There is no panacea. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. It takes hard work, fidelity to science, learning, adapting as you go, and difficult decisions, of course. But there are many common components that must be part of every national strategy. A whole of government and a whole of society response that engages and empowers people and communities to keep themselves and others safe. The commitment and capacity to find, isolate, test, and care for every case and trace and quarantine every contact, and special attention to vulnerable groups like people living in nursing homes, refugee camps, prisons, and detention centers. Since day one, WHO has stood shoulder to shoulder with countries in this darkest of hours. WHO sounded the alarm early, and we sounded it often. We notified countries, issued guidance for health workers within 10 days, and declared global health emergency, our highest level of alert, on the 30th of January. At the time, there were less than 100 cases and no deaths outside China. We have provided technical guidance and strategic advice based on the latest science and experience. We have supported countries to adapt and implement that guidance. We have shipped diagnostics, personal protective equipment, oxygen, and other medical supplies to more than 120 countries. We have trained more than 2.6 million health workers in 23 languages. We have driven research and development through the Solidarity Trial. We have called the equitable access to vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics through the ACT, the ACT Accelerator. We have informed, engaged, and empowered people. We have fought the infodemic, combating myths with reliable information. And we have called consistently for the two essential ingredients for conquering this virus: national unity and global solidarity. We all have lessons to learn from the pandemic. Every country and every organization must examine its response and learn from its experience. WHO is committed to transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement. For us, change is a constant. In fact, the existing independent accountability mechanisms are already in operation since the pandemic started. The Independent Oversight Advisory Committee has today published its first report on the pandemic. with several recommendations for both the Secretariat and Member States. In that spirit, we welcome the proposed resolution before this Assembly, which calls for a stepwise process of impartial, independent, and comprehensive evaluation. To be truly comprehensive, such an evaluation must encompass the entirety of the response by all actors in good faith. So, I will initiate an independent evaluation at the earliest appropriate moment to review experience gained and lessons learned and to make recommendations to improve national and global pandemic preparedness and response. But one thing is abundantly clear. The world must never be the same. We do not need a review to tell us that we must all do everything in our power to ensure this never happens again. Whatever lessons there are to learn from this pandemic, the greatest failing would be to not learn from them and to leave the world in the same vulnerable state it was before. If there is anything positive to come from this pandemic, it must be a safer and more resilient world. This is not a new message. Reviews after SARS, the H1N1 pandemic, and the West African Ebola epidemic highlighted shortcomings in global health security and made numerous recommendations for countries to address those gaps. Some were implemented, others went unheeded. The SARS outbreak gave rise to the revision of the international health regulations in 2005. The H1N1 pandemic saw the creation of the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, and the Ebola outbreak of 2014 and 15 led to the establishment of the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility, the WHO Emergencies Program, and the Independent Oversight Advisory Committee. The world doesn't need another plan, another system, another mechanism, another committee, or another organization. It needs to strengthen, implement, and finance the systems and organizations it has, including WHO. Many leaders who have spoken today raised two issues: implementing, supporting WHO, and financing. The world can no longer afford the short-term amnesia that has characterized its response to health security for too long. The time has come to weave together the disparate strands of global health security into an unbreakable chain, a comprehensive framework for epidemic and pandemic preparedness. The world does not lack the tools, the science, or the resources to make it safer from pandemics. What it has lacked is the sustained commitment to use the tools, the science, and the resources it has. That must change, and it must change today. Today, I'm calling on all nations to resolve that they will do everything it takes to ensure that the 2020 coronavirus pandemic is never repeated. I'm calling on all nations to invest in strengthening and implementing the many tools at our disposal, especially the global treaty that underpins global health security, the international health regulations. To be successful, we must all commit to mutual ownership and accountability. One way to do that, proposed by the Africa Group last year, is through a system of universal periodic review, in which countries agree to a regular and transparent review of each nation's preparedness. Since my election at this Assembly 3 years ago, I have made a priority of transforming WHO into an organization that's agile and responsive, focused on outcomes and impact. 2 years ago, I presented, and this assembly approved, the cornerstone of our transformation, WHO's 13th General Program of Work. At its heart are the ambitious triple billion targets. 1 billion more people enjoying better health and well-being, 1 billion more people benefiting from universal health coverage, and 1 billion more people better protected from health emergencies. These are the targets that the world has set itself to achieve by 2023 to get on track and stay on track for the Sustainable Development Goals. The WHO results report launched today provides a comprehensive picture of what WHO, its member states and partners have achieved in the past 2 years. On healthy populations, we have made important progress to improve the air people breathe, the food they eat, the water they drink, the roads they use, and the conditions in which they live and work are the most important, actually, in bringing health. On universal health coverage, the world came together last year to endorse the political declaration on UHC, an unprecedented commitment to the ideals of health for all. We have expanded access to prevention, testing, and treatment for HIV, TB, malaria, hepatitis C, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, and more. And to keep the world safe, WHO has investigated, when necessary, responded to more than 900 events in 141 countries. That includes coordinating a huge and complex response to the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, complicated by violence, a mobile population, and a weak health system. All of these efforts have been supported by an increased focus on science, evidence, and data. In the coming year, we will launch the WHO Academy to provide training for millions more health workers around the world. And the WHO Foundation will be launched in the next few weeks to broaden WHO's donor base. I am proud of the progress WHO has made in this and many other areas. However, much work remains to be done. Even before COVID-19, the world was off track for the SDGs. The pandemic threatens to set us back even further. It exploits and exacerbates existing gaps in gender equality, poverty, hunger, and more. Already we have seen the impact of the pandemic on immunization campaigns and many other essential health services. But the challenges we face cannot be an excuse to abandon hope of achieving the triple billion targets or the SDGs. On the contrary, they must serve as motivation to redouble our efforts and to work aggressively in pursuit of the healthier, safer, fairer world we all want. Although COVID-19 is rightly the focus of the world's attention now, we must not lose focus on sustaining and accelerating other initiatives that have saved millions of lives in recent years, like the work of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Over the past 20 years, Gavi has supported countries to vaccinate 760 million children, preventing more than 13 million deaths. Gavi has set an ambitious goal to immunize 300 million more children with 18 vaccines by 2025. We call on the global community to support Gavi's upcoming replenishment, hosted by the United Kingdom, to ensure it is fully funded for this life-saving work. Last week, my friend Dr. Suit from Thailand sent me a message. This is what he said. Actually, COVID has demonstrated how WHO's triple billion goals are interconnected. Universal health coverage plays big roles in the COVID response in many countries, and healthy lives mean less deaths from COVID. I couldn't agree more. COVID-19 is not just a global health emergency. It is a vivid demonstration of the fact that there is no health security without resilient health systems or without addressing the social, economic, commercial, and environmental determinants of health. More than ever, the pandemic illustrates why investing in health must be at the center of development. I will repeat this. More than ever, the pandemic illustrates why investing in health must be at the center of development. We're learning the hard way that health is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is a necessity. Health is not a reward for development. It is a prerequisite. Health is not a cost. It's an investment. Health is a pathway to security, prosperity, and peace. My brothers and sisters, 40 years ago, the nations of the world came together under the banner of WHO to rid the world of smallpox. They showed that when solidarity triumphs over ideology, anything is possible. The COVID-19 pandemic is posing a similar threat, not just to human health, but to the human spirit. We have a long road ahead in our struggle against this virus. The pandemic has tested, strengthened, and strained the bonds of fellowships, but it has not broken them. The COVID-19 pandemic is asking us two fundamental questions. What sort of world do we want? And what sort of WHO do we want? The answer to the first question will determine the answer to the second. Now, more than ever, we need a healthier world. Now, more than ever, we need a safer world. Now, more than ever, we need a fairer world. Healthy, safe, and fair. And now, more than ever, we need a stronger WHO. There is no other way forward but together. I thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director General, for your speech. This concludes the high-level welcome. And I now hand over the floor to the 72nd WHA's President. President, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam. Excellencies, before I officially open the assembly, I would like to make a few remarks. As the world fights the COVID-19 pandemic, Secretary General of UN, His Excellency Mr. Guterres, just said, now is the time for unity. The COVID-19 pandemic is in all countries. It affects every person in the global community for all aspects of life. regionally, nationally, and globally, our health, well-being, social life, and economic viability are challenged, even threatened. Our lockdown is necessary to keep COVID under control, but hampers our ability to conduct our routine work. Furthermore, we expect economic recovery to take a long time, while we advocate to maintain domestic and international support for health and social programs and expect to reduce fiscal space for them globally. Because of lower and middle income countries have less reserve, we will bear the weight of the slow economic recovery disproportionately. At the same time, we face phasing out of various programs that support improving delivery and routine activities. For example, we are in the transition period for Gavi graduate. Together, these all with our reaching the Sustainable Development Goal and other international targets. Thus, we are requesting flexibility during this transition period. We have heard today from a broad cross-section of leaders in their fight against COVID-19. Evident were the struggles we all face both domestically and in distribution to address the global pandemic from France, Germany, and Switzerland in Europe to the Republic of Korea in our own region, across South Africa, and from a small island state, Barbados. The message from President Xi Jinping has inspired us so much to fight the pandemic. And we are so pleased to learn from the success of the scientists in handling the COVID-19 pandemic in the country, as well as its active participation and mobilization of global efforts to fight against the novel virus. Furthermore, China has played a significant role in providing the valuable assistance in the medical equipment and expertise to developing countries. They have also supported to the World Health Organization to take charge of the global efforts and solidarity that is needed more than ever at this critical time. We highly evaluate the concept of community of health for mankind raised by President. This has demonstrated the true spirit of global partnership for humanity that China has undertaken, and we really appreciate that. Excellencies, Honorable Director General, ladies and gentlemen, with this spirit, I would like now to welcome you to the 73rd World Health Assembly. Let us now turn to election of the President. In accordance with the rules of the rules of procedure, at each regular session, the Assembly shall elect the President and 5 Vice Presidents who shall hold office until their successors are elected. In advance of the Health Assembly, a white paper has been created which contains names of candidates proposed for consideration following consultations within their respective regions as well as their respective countries. to consider the nomination for the office of the President of the 73rd World Health Assembly. I recall that accordance with the practice of regional rotation, which the Assembly has followed for many years, the President of the 73rd World Health Assembly is chosen among the list of members of the Nation of the Americas. I understand that Her Excellency Ms. Ben, permanent representative of Bahamas to the United Nations Office, Geneva, is proposed for office of President of the Third World Health Assembly. Is this proposal acceptable? In the absence of any, and as it appears that there are no other proposals, I suggest, in accordance with the rule of the rules of procedure, that the Assembly approve the nomination and elect President by Ambassador Ben by elected President of the 73rd Assembly. Congratulations, Ben. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, Ambassadors, Delegates, Director General, I would like to thank this august Assembly for their trust in electing me as the President of the 73rd World Health Assembly. I would like to express my appreciation to my predecessor, Dr. Bonkong Sahavong, Minister of Health, Lao People's Democratic Republic, for his contribution to the last World Health Assembly. We shall now turn to the nomination for the offices of Vice Presidents of the Health Assembly. I would like to recall that since a delegate from a member of the region of the Americas has filled the post of president, it would be equitable to choose the vice presidents from among delegates coming from the other 5 WHO regions. In this regard, the following proposals have been received. His Excellency Mr. Li Song, People's Republic of China. Mrs. Jacqueline Lydia Mukulu, Congo. Mr. Roberto Shivata, San Marino. Dr. Akimram Elton, Sudan. Dr. Varaz Tencharo Onsa Tiem, Thailand. Before I put the proposal to decision, may I make the following request? A few delegations have raised their hands before the meeting began. Please, may I ask those delegations to lower their hands now. If a delegation wishes to request the floor, it needs to raise its hand. So, of course, it is important that everyone start with hands down. This will enable us to proceed in an orderly fashion. So, I have just read the names of the 5 proposals for vice presidents. Are these proposals acceptable to the Assembly? I understand that the United Arab Emirates has raised their hand. I understand that their hand has been lowered. This is new for all of us, so please bear with us all. We're going to get through it. Patience, everyone. In the absence of any objections, I take it that it is the wish of the Health Assembly to elect by acclamation the 5 delegates I mentioned previously for the post of vice presidents of the 73rd World Health Assembly. I take this opportunity to congratulate the vice presidents on their election. I shall now determine by lot of order in which the vice president shall be requested to serve should the president be unable to act in between sessions. The names of the 5 vice presidents who I referred to earlier have been written down on 5 separate paper slips, which I'm going to draw by lot. Mrs. Jacqueline Lydia Mukulu, Congo. Mr. Roberto Shabata San Marino. Vice Presidents, please bear with me should I not be pronouncing your names correctly. I'm trying here. Dr. Viraj Tencharadon Ansanthiam, Thailand. I'm getting there. His Excellency Mr. Li Song, People's Republic of China. Dr. Akram Elton, Sudan. Now, it is my pleasure to deliver the presidential address. Your Excellency, President Dr. Boon Kong Siata Wang, Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Honorable Ministers and Heads of Delegation, ladies and gentlemen. I join the Assembly in congratulating Dr. Siha Wang, Minister of Health of the Laos People's Democratic Republic, for the poise, eloquence, and order he brought to the chair of the President during the 72nd World Health Assembly. In these uncertain and challenging times facing the global community, the resolute and inspiring leadership of the Director General remains certain, and we commend you and this organization, Dr. Tedros, which requires the global mantle for a healthier, safe, and fairer world. This presidency has great meaning for the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and indeed the Caribbean community and diaspora. I would like to take this opportunity to personally thank the government and people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for the confidence they have shown in selecting me to serve in this post at such an historic time. It is indeed an honor and privilege. We convene the 73rd Assembly during an unprecedented time in history when the global community is faced with negative health, social, and economic effects of the spread of the coronavirus. And the Assembly convened virtually, bringing together participants from across the globe. The public health community has faced challenges in the past. Global health issues transcend national boundaries and governments and call for action on the part of the global forces that determine the health of people. However, at no time in our recent memories has there been such a global impact of a disease, placing the lives, livelihood, and learning of so many in peril, disrupting supply chains, and bringing economies to a grinding halt. Statistically, in terms of numbers, the burden of COVID-19 has risen to over 4 million confirmed cases and close to 300,000 deaths in all 6 regions of the World Health Organization. In the wake of COVID-19, we have witnessed stock markets tumbling, unemployment rising in historic highs, conditions in fragile settings exacerbated, and peace and social cohesion threatened. Over the centuries, global action has yielded countless successes for global health, improving not only longevity, but also the quality of life. Ancient Babylonian civilization herald the sewage systems designed to protect water supply from contamination and disease. The discovery of pasteurization in the 1860s was a turning point in securing the safety of food supplies. The post-World War II era gave the global health community the tuberculosis vaccine. The past 25 years have witnessed a particularly golden era of unprecedented health achievements. Child mortality cut by 47%. Maternal mortality reduced by 45%, and reversals in the spread of HIV and AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. This era of COVID-19 ushers in new technology. It requires new knowledge, new innovations, flexibility, meaningful, respectful country interactions, as well as new and greater global partnerships. The role of the World Health Organization in this time of crisis reminds us that we live in an interdependent and interconnected world, where health and well-being are shaped by circumstances, decisions, and events occurring in distant places. Bacterial and viral threats travel almost as quickly and unencumbered as email messages, Twitter, and money flows. The World Health Organization must be steadfast in guiding the response to COVID-19, and at the same time, exact a balance with its mandate to meet the challenges that threaten the survival of many people, including those with chronic non-communicable diseases. The mere nature of our explorative spirit and our humanity suggests we will overcome these challenges. We will find solutions to these current realities that confront us now and in the aftermath of COVID-19. We will embrace new lifestyles that promote good health. We will repurpose and maximize our resources. We will establish a new balance between the economic, the physical, and the psychological welfare of our citizens. While we have lost a generation of elder citizens and those with comorbidities due to COVID-19, we must be resolute to preserve those who are with us. Juggling the health welfare with the social and economic pressures confronting us signals the complexity of the moment. But we are up to the task. Successfully negotiating COVID-19 and the post-COVID era requires that we shift, we recalibrate, and make key investments. It requires that we invest more in new technologies which are accessible to the majority of the people, that we take measures to protect the most vulnerable during the epidemic, and that we address the economic aftermath of worsening inequities. The Assembly would recall that in September 2020, Hurricane Dorian, a Category 5 climatic event, mercilessly brought mass devastation on the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama, two of the more northern islands in our archipelagic chain. For us, Dorian amassed 74 official deaths, but it displaced thousands and exacted an economic toll of $3.4 billion in damages and losses. The Bahamas has yet to recover from Dorian and does not have the luxury of dismissing COVID-19. The Bahamas must delicately strategize to mitigate the human, social, environmental, and financial fallout of Dorian and COVID-19. This is no small task, but we will not be daunted. We will rebuild strong. Our resilience continues to propel us to new strengths. despite the financial challenges, the Bahamas, as evidenced by its modeling approaches, has demonstrated the positive impact of public health measures for COVID-19. To date, the Bahamas has confirmed 96 cases of COVID-19 and 11 deaths. The number of recovered cases are at 43. There are 7 hospitalized cases. 1,814 tests have been completed. I salute the millions of healthcare workers who valiantly stood in the gap as we fought the spread of the virus and its impact on the global community. Some lost their lives. Others endured substantial emotional and mental strains, but all continue to give their best for mankind. In conclusion, the bedrock of public health remains constant. Equity, quality, whole of society approach, collaboration, and solidarity across boundaries and borders. As we deliberate over the next 2 days, I trust we will manage our time effectively and efficiently and remain resolute in our determination to aim for the greater good, the common good, the public good. Thank you. The Assembly will now consider the special procedures to regulate the conduct of the virtual de minimis meetings of the World Health Assembly, which are contained in Annex 1 of document A73/33. As we all know, the document before us today has been the subject of extensive informal consultations involving all members. May I take it that the Health Assembly is content to adopt the special procedures contained in Annex 1 of document A73/33 and to apply them to this meeting? Should any delegation wish to take the floor on this particular matter, could you please indicate now by raising your hand? I see no objection. It is so decided. I'd like to thank you for your cooperation. Now, turning to the matter of credentials, and in line with the special procedures just adopted, I would like to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Socorro Flores Lira, Permanent Representative of Mexico to the United Nations Office in Geneva, to present the report. Her Excellency, I give you the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. In my capacity as first Vice President of the 72nd session of the Health Assembly, I met with the President and two other Vice Presidents of the 72nd session on Sunday, 17th May 2020, to consider the credentials submitted by Member States to participate in the 73rd session of the World Health Assembly. It's my pleasure to report to the Assembly that 180 Member States have submitted credentials, which were found to be consistent with the rules of procedure of the Assembly. I would therefore recommend to the Assembly that the said 180 Member States mentioned be accepted as having submitted credentials in conformity with the rules of procedure. In addition to this oral report, I've been informed that since yesterday's meeting with the officers of the 72nd session, another 6 Member States have submitted credentials. It hasn't been feasible to meet again with the officers of the 72nd session, but according to previous practice followed during regular sessions, the President of the 72nd session has examined the credentials of these 6 Member States and has found them to be in keeping with the Assembly's rules of procedure. I would therefore recommend to the Assembly that the said 6 Member States should also be accepted as having submitted credentials consistent with the rules of procedure. I'd like to mention that over the last few hours, the following Member States have submitted credentials that have been considered in conformity with the rules of procedures: Comoros, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Gambia. I therefore recommend that the Comoros, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Gambia should also be accepted as having submitted credentials in line with the rules of procedure of the World Health Assembly. Finally, President, I'd like to inform the Assembly that the following Member States have not submitted credentials and are thus not represented at this Health Assembly: Guinea-Bissau, New Samoa, and South Sudan. And this concludes my report, President. Thank you.
My apologies. Thank you, Her Excellency. May I take it that the Assembly agrees to Her Excellency's report? In this age of technology, I see no objections. It is so decided. The list of member states having submitted valid credentials will shortly be available in the journal. Dear delegates, we now turn to the important matter of our agenda. This is item 1.4. you will see that we have before us 3 documents. They are the Provisional Agenda Document A73/1, the Provisional Agenda Abridged, which is Document A73/1, Add 1, and a proposal for a supplementary agenda item entitled Inviting Taiwan to Participate in the World Health Assembly as an Observer. This is contained in document A73/1, Add 2. Regarding this matter, I would like to propose the following. I would propose that we adopt our agendas, both the abridged and the provisional agenda, on the understanding that we shall consider the request for the supplementary agenda item at the resumed session of the Assembly. Further, consideration of the request for this supplementary item at the resumed session would be done in accordance with the relevant rules of procedure. By this, I mean that at the resumed session, the proposal for the supplementary agenda item would, in accordance with Rule 12 of the Rules of Procedure, first be considered by the General Committee. Then, the General Committee would make a recommendation to the plenary on whether or not to include the proposed supplementary item on the agenda. The recommendation would then be considered by the plenary. I note that we hope that the resumed session of the Assembly will be actual and not virtual. But in the event that the resumed session is virtual, we would find a virtual way to follow this arrangement, convening the General Committee in virtual session. This proposal of mine to the plenary is based on my understanding of the outcome of informal consultations among concerned parties, including, of course, the 14 member states who submitted the request for the supplementary agenda item, and my understanding that there is general support for my proposal way forward. In this connection, please also allow me to express appreciation for the goodwill of all concerned in respect of this matter. May I therefore take it that there is no objection to my proposal as I have just set out? I see no objection. It is so decided. Thank you for this decision. Accordingly, the agendas are hereby adopted, and the proposal for a supplementary item shall be considered at the resumed session in accordance with the relevant rules of procedure. We have now completed our work under agenda item 1.4. Before turning to the next item, I would like to recognize the statements provided during the opening and recognizing the important relevance of these to the discussion on COVID-19 pandemic, and propose that they be added to the official records of the meeting. May I take it that the Assembly agrees with this proposal? I see no objections. It is so decided. Croatia? I understand that Croatia would like to take the floor. Croatia, you have the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. The European Union works closely with the World Health Organization on a wide range of subjects, both within the European region and on a global level. As agreed in the exchange of letters of 2000 between the WHO and the European Commission concerning the consolidation and intensification of cooperation, and without prejudice to any future conclusion of a general agreement between the WHO and the European Union, European Union delegation attended the World Health Assembly as observer. As in previous sessions, we asked the Assembly to kindly agree that the European Union delegation be also invited to attend and participate also in the deliberations of meetings and some committees, drafting groups, or other subdivisions thereof addressing matters failing within Union competence in the 73rd session of the World Health Assembly. Thank you.
May I take it that the Assembly agrees? It is so decided. Now, let us turn to item 3 of the agenda. Address by Dr. Tedros, the Director General.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. First of all, congratulations on your election, and look forward to support you in any way possible and help this assembly virtual for the first time, which will be a challenge for all of us to go through together. You have made already a very good start, so congratulations on that. I have already spoken earlier, and I believe that I don't want to take more time. So thank you so much again for the opportunity. I will follow the other programs and participate, but I don't think the additional speech will be necessary, and I hope our member state will get a chance also to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros. Now we shall turn to the statements of delegations, which will be provided under item 3. and I shall turn the floor over to the Secretariat to manage this aspect of the session. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We have a number of countries who've inscribed to speak, and we do have regional statements that would precede those national statements. If you permit me, I would indicate those who've asked to make regional statements. We do have Antigua and Barbuda, Estonia, Azerbaijan, Congo, Djibouti, Montenegro, Nauru, the Netherlands, Tunisia. I'll give the floor to Antigua, to be followed by Estonia. It appears we don't have Antigua yet. We would go to Estonia and then to Azerbaijan. Estonia, you have the floor. Okay, we would call on Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. Yes, this is the statement of the Ministry of Health on behalf of the non-aligned movement at the 73rd Assembly. Madam President, Mr. Director General, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the non-aligned movement. This year, the international community has been faced with a pandemic which has disrupted lives and livelihoods of millions of people, thus creating a state of paralysis in societies and economies. The non-alignment movement expresses its concern at the global threat posed by COVID-19 and emphasizes that the control of the pandemic relies on preparedness, prevention, resilience building, and the greater national, regional, and international collaboration and actions to address this challenge in an effective and timely manner. Upon the initiative of Azerbaijan's NAM chairmanship, the contact group to combat coronavirus was set up, and on May 4th, year 2020, on the online summit of this contact group has been held. In the declaration adopted by summit, the heads of the states and governments expressed their full support to the WHO while recognizing its critical role, guidance, and leadership in ensuring the effective response of the international community. The summit also established the NAM task force, which will develop a database of humanitarian and medical needs of NAM member states, which will be presented to donor countries and international organizations for the provisions of feasible assistance. During the summit, His Excellency the President of Azerbaijan also announced a donation of another $5 million to WHO to support the most affected NAM member states. The non-alignment movement reiterates its traditional support for multilateralism with the United Nations at its core, expresses full support to UN Secretary General initiatives to fight the pandemic, and acknowledges that preserving and strengthening the values of multilateralism and international cooperation is fundamental to promoting and supporting all three pillars of the United Nations. We also express our strong condemnation at the promulgation and application of unilateral coercive measures against member states of the movement that are applied in violation of the Charter of United Nations and international law. Further express our support in accordance with international law to the states affected by such measures and urge the international community to adopt urgent and effective measures to eliminate the use of such measures that are inconsistent with the principles of international law or the chapter of the United Nations, with a view of ensuring the effectiveness of national responses to COVID-19 pandemic. The non-member states express their gratitude to medical personnel and reiterate their readiness to continue collaborating with the WHO in ensuring that one of the fundamental rights of every human being, the enjoyment of highest attainable standards of health, is ensured, that no one is left behind. Global efforts are rightly focused on countering the immediate and devastating impacts of COVID-19. However, going forward, the international community needs to shape a global health agenda that responds effectively to the future pandemics. That would require adequate resourcing and, where appropriate, policy space for the WHO. Equitable access, fair distribution, and affordability of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines for COVID-19 are important priorities for the developing countries, which should be responded to. There is also a need for exploring new instruments to regulate R&D for pharmaceutical products guided primarily by health consideration. The non-member states reiterate their commitments to achieving universal health coverage and health-related sustainable development goals by year 2030 to ensure health security and emergencies, particularly to integrated surveillance, building long-term capacities, and promoting progressive self-reliant strategy based on local production and affordable quality medicines and the development of health technologies. In line with the principle of health for all, the member states call upon the WHO to strengthen their support to governments in their efforts to effectively respond to COVID-19 by providing unhindered assistance and an inclusive and sustained manner during and after the pandemic. In this context, helping the most vulnerable people, including the people under the foreign occupation, including detainees, should enjoy the special attention in line with respect and dignity and leaving no one behind. In conclusion, the non-aligned movement calls upon all states to spare no effort in transforming 2020 into the year of solidarity and renewed multilateral cooperation to effectively address the emerging global threats. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you very much. I will now call on Croatia, who will be speaking on behalf of the European Union and EU member states. You have the floor, Croatia.
Honorable Distinguished Director General, distinguished delegates. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries, Montenegro and Albania, the country of the stabilization and association process, and the potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ukraine, and the Republic of Moldova, as well as Romania, align themselves with this statement. The global outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged the world unprecedented debate and put a heavy toll on people, societies, and economies. Strengthening efficient multilateralism and response is more essential now than ever before. We commend the WHO for its leadership and thank all WHO staff for their tireless and excellent work. We stress the pertinence of coordinated international cooperation and solidarity under the umbrella of the United Nations system and the crucial importance of measures taken at national level for the successful response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We acknowledge